A quarry is a wound in the earth that fills with water the moment you stop pumping it out. This is not a flaw in the quarry. It is a fact about groundwater, which exists everywhere beneath the surface at a depth determined by the geology and the season, and which will rise into any hole that intersects its level with the patient inevitability of a thing that has nowhere else to go. The limestone quarries of central Tennessee were particularly prone to flooding because the limestone itself was an aquifer, a porous rock that held water in its fractures and joints and released it into any excavation that cut through the water table. And the water that filled these quarries was cold and clean and constant, fed by the same underground system that fed the springs and wells of the surrounding countryside. The quarry on Cheatham Creek had been worked for 12 years, 1870 to 1882, by a company that cut building stone for the courthouse in Cookville and the bridge abutments on the Caney Fork River. When the contracts ended, the company pulled its pumps and left, and the quarry filled in 6 weeks, groundwater rising through the fractured limestone floor until the excavation became a pond 60 feet long, 40 feet wide, and 14 feet deep at the center, with vertical limestone walls on 3 sides and a graded ramp on the 4th where the wagons had entered. The water was 48 degrees year-round, the constant temperature of the deep aquifer that fed it, and it was clear enough to see the tool marks on the quarry floor 14 feet below the surface. Delia Boyce did not want the quarry. She did not want the 12 acres that surrounded it, the collapsing equipment shed on the south rim, or the pile of reject stone blocks. Limestone pieces cut but never shipped, stacked along the east wall in rows that had been neat in 1882 and were now tilted and moss-covered and sinking into the clay. She did not want any of it, but she got all of it because her parents-in-law, Clive and Orla Boyce, gave it to her when they told her to leave their son's house, and they gave it to her the way people give away things they consider worthless, as a gesture that looks generous from a distance and feels like an insult up close. The marriage had lasted 3 years. Delia had married Reuben Boyce in 1884, when she was 19 and Reuben was 22, and the future was a thing that young people in Tennessee still believed cooperated with plans. Reuben was a decent man, but a weak one. Decent enough to marry Delia against his mother's wishes, and weak enough to let his mother undo the marriage when it did not produce the grandchildren that Orla regarded as the primary purpose of any union. The separation was not legal. Divorce was expensive and scandalous, but it was effective. Orla told Delia to leave. Reuben said nothing, and Delia was given the quarry property as a settlement, which Clive described as generous, and which Delia understood as exile, because the quarry was 4 miles from the nearest neighbor, and the land around it was too rocky for farming, and the only asset on the property was a hole full of water that no one had found a use for in 5 years. She was 22 years old, 5 feet 5 inches tall, with dark hair that fell straight to her shoulders and that she cut bluntly with a knife because scissors were a luxury she had stopped affording. Dark brown eyes that were steady and direct in a way that some people found uncomfortable, because steady, direct eyes in a woman suggest opinions, and opinions in a woman suggest trouble. A square face with a firm mouth and a cleft chin, and hands that were broader than they should have been for a woman her size. The hands of someone who had been hauling water and splitting kindling and kneading bread since the age of 8. She wore a brown cotton dress, a canvas apron, leather boots with laces that she had replaced with rawhide cord, and a knitted gray shawl that her grandmother had made, and that was the only soft thing she owned. She did not cry when she left the boys' house. She had done her crying in private, in the weeks between Orla's announcement and her departure, and by the time she loaded the mule cart, she was finished with tears the way a well is finished with water when the pump pulls air. Not because the grief was gone, but because the mechanism that produced it had run dry. She arrived at the quarry on the 23rd of March, 1887, with a mule cart containing her clothes, a cook stove, a set of iron pots, bedding, seed for a garden, and a determination that was not optimism. Optimism requires imagination, and Delia did not imagine good outcomes. She simply refused to accept bad ones, which is a different thing entirely and considerably more useful on a 12-acre property with a flooded quarry and no house. If you want to know what a girl who was thrown out by her in-laws did with a flooded quarry and a pile of reject stone that ended up saving 4 families, subscribe to The Warm Floor and tell us in the comments where you are watching from today. The equipment shed was the first shelter. It was a 3-sided structure on the south rim of the quarry. Pine posts and board walls, open on the north side facing the water, with a tin roof that leaked in 7 places and a dirt floor that turned to mud in rain. Delia patched the roof with flattened tin cans and pine tar, closed the open north side with a wall of reject stone blocks stacked dry. The blocks were already cut to uniform size by the quarry workers, 18 inches by 12 inches by 8 inches. And they stacked like oversized bricks without mortar or skill, just weight on weight, and the wall went up in 2 days. The shed became livable, but not comfortable. The real building began in April, when Delia started constructing a house on the east rim of the quarry, using the reject stone blocks that the quarry company had left behind. The blocks were the gift that Clive Boyce did not know he had given. 340 cut limestone blocks, each weighing approximately 80 pounds, pre-shaped to uniform dimensions, stacked and waiting on the east rim like a building kit that someone had ordered and forgotten to assemble. A stonemason would have charged $3 per block for cutting alone. $1,000 worth of dressed stone sitting in the weeds, free, because the company that cut them had gone bankrupt, and the family that owned the land considered them part of the worthless property they had used to get rid of a daughter-in-law. Delia built the house in courses, 2 blocks wide for the exterior walls, creating a wall thickness of 24 inches, with a rubble fill of broken stone and clay between the inner and outer courses for additional mass. The house was 12 feet by 16 feet, a single room, small but solid, with walls that weighed approximately 36,000 pounds when complete. 36,000 pounds of limestone surrounding a room that was 12 by 16 feet, and every pound of it was thermal mass that would hold heat in winter and hold cool in summer with the absolute reliability of a material that does not know how to do anything else. She laid the blocks without mortar for the first 3 courses, dry stacked on a foundation of flat quarry floor stones that she pried from the rim and carried to the building site. Above the 3rd course, she mortared the joints with a mix of lime and clay that she made by burning limestone fragments in a pit fire, slaking the quickite with water and mixing the paste with creek clay until it reached the consistency of thick porridge. The mortar set slowly, 2 weeks to full hardness, but it set permanently, bonding the blocks into a monolithic mass that was, by the time the walls reached their full 7-foot height, as solid as the quarry face from which the blocks had been cut. If this story has touched your heart, take a moment to share it and subscribe to The Warm Floor, because stories like these deserve to be remembered. The roof was pine poles and cedar shingles. the poles cut from the woodlot on the north side of the property, the shingles split by hand from cedar logs she dragged from the creek bottom where they had fallen and cured in the water for years, producing a rot-resistant wood that would last decades without treatment. The door faced south, a plank door in a stone frame with a stone lintel across the top that weighed 110 pounds and that took Delia 3 attempts to lift into place. 2 windows, small, 12 inches square, covered with oiled deerskin until she could afford glass, admitted light on the east and south walls. The floor was packed earth over a base of crushed limestone, the same technique the quarry workers had used for the equipment shed floor, tamped hard and smooth, the white limestone chips compressing into a surface that was nearly as solid as concrete and that had the additional benefit of reflecting the light from the windows upward into the room, brightening the interior of the small stone house in a way that dark earth floors could not. She built a hearth against the north wall, the wall farthest from the door, the wall that received no direct sun, and that was therefore the coldest surface in the room. The hearth was reject blocks stacked into a firebox with a fireback of flat quarry stone angled to reflect heat into the room, and a chimney of the same blocks mortared tight and rising through the roof. The chimney drew well. The height of the stone stack created a strong natural draft, and the dense limestone of the chimney walls absorbed heat from the rising smoke and radiated it back into the room from above. A secondary heating effect that most chimneys waste, because most chimneys are built of brick that is thinner and lighter than the 24-inch limestone blocks that Delia used. She built a sleeping platform against the east wall, raised on stone supports 8 inches above the floor, with a rope and pole frame and a mattress of dried grass covered with her bedding. She built a plank table from salvaged lumber, boards pulled from the equipment shed walls that she did not need after closing the north side with stone. She built a shelf along the south wall, between the door and the window, for her provisions and her pots and her grandmother's shawl, which she folded and placed on the shelf when she was working and wore when she was not. The total cost of the house was $2.15, $1.40 for the chimney cap and door hardware, and 75 cents for the rope and pulley for the quarry crane. Every block of stone was free. Every tool mark in every block had been made by a quarry worker, paid by a company that had gone bankrupt, and the labor of cutting 340 blocks of limestone, labor that would have cost $1,000 at market rate, was a gift from the past to the present, delivered through the indifference of a father-in-law who did not know what he was giving away. The quarry water was the second advantage. 48 degrees year-round, clear, clean, and available in unlimited quantity 14 feet below the rim. Delia built a wooden crane on the east rim, a simple A-frame with a rope and pulley salvaged from the equipment shed, and lowered a bucket on a rope to draw water. The water was cold enough for refrigeration. She built a stone cold box on the quarry rim where the crane stood, a small enclosure of reject blocks with a fitted stone lid, the interior lined with wet burlap sacks soaked in quarry water, the evaporation cooling the interior to 52 degrees in summer. Butter, milk, and cheese stored in the cold box stayed fresh for a week without ice. She dug a garden on the south side of the house, rocky soil, cleared of stones with the same patience that had built the walls, amended with leaf mold from the woodlot and manure from a goat she bought in May. The garden was small, 20 feet by 30 feet. But the soil was fertile once the rocks were removed because limestone country soil is rich in calcium and phosphorus, and the crops came up strong. Beans, corn, potatoes, squash, turnips, and the tomatoes that would become her primary trade good because Delia's tomatoes, grown in limestone soil and watered with 48-degree quarry water, were the reddest and firmest and best-tasting tomatoes in the district, and people noticed. The house was finished by July. The first winter tested it, December through February of 1887 to 88. Standard Tennessee winter, temperatures in the 20s at night, occasional snow. The 24-inch stone walls performed as 24 inches of limestone always performs. They absorbed the heat from the cook stove, stored it in 36,000 pounds of thermal mass, and radiated it back into the room for hours after the fire went out. Delia burned 10 pounds of wood per day. Her nearest neighbor, Hobart Fleet, who farmed 3 miles east, burned 35 pounds in a frame cabin that was colder by 15 degrees on the same nights. If you are enjoying this story, hit that like button right now. It is free, takes a second, and helps the warm floor reach more people who need to hear it. Now, back to the story. The 4 families arrived in the second year, not because of the house, but because of the water. The summer of 1888 was dry. Not the catastrophic drought of 1886, but a steady dryness that dropped the water table across the district, drying shallow wells and reducing creek flows to trickles. The quarry, fed by the deep aquifer, did not drop. The water level decreased by 8 inches, from 14 feet deep to 13 feet 4 inches, and held there because the aquifer that fed it was deeper than the wells and the drought could not reach it. Hobart Fleet's well went dry in July. His was not the first. The Spivey well on the ridge had dropped below the pump reach in late June, and the Gannett spring had slowed to a seep that produced 2 gallons an hour instead of its normal 20. But Hobart's well was the deepest in the district, 32 feet, hand-dug through clay and shale to the limestone below. And when Hobart's well went dry, the district understood that this was not a temporary shortage, but a systemic failure, the water table dropping below the reach of every well that human hands had dug. Hobart came to the quarry with empty barrels on a wagon and a look on his face that Delia had seen before, the look of a man who needs help from someone he has not helped. His mule was breathing hard from the 4-mile pull, and the barrels rattled empty in the wagon bed with a hollow sound that was the sound of a farm running out of the one thing it cannot run without. She let him fill his barrels. She showed him how to work the crane, lower the bucket on the rope, let it fill, haul it back with the pulley, pour it into the barrel, repeat. 2 barrels took 20 minutes. She gave him tomatoes from the garden. She did not mention that Hobart had told his wife that the Boyce girl was living on a rock pile and would be gone by Christmas, because mentioning it would not have changed the water level in his well and would not have made the tomatoes less red. The Lanford family came next. Abel and Trudy Lanford with 3 children and a dairy cow that had not had a proper drink in 4 days. The cow was producing half her normal milk, and the children were drinking water from a creek pool that Trudy did not trust, but that was the only water left on their property. Abel was a proud man, 40 years old, raw-boned and quiet, with a weathered face that showed every year of farming in hard country. And asking a 23-year-old woman for water was not something he did easily. He stood at the quarry rim and looked at the 60-foot pond of clear cold water and said, "How much can we take?" "As much as you need," Delia said. "It comes back." She was right. the quarry refilled at the same rate, regardless of how much was drawn, because the aquifer fed it from below at a constant flow that the surface withdrawal barely affected. Drawing 100 gallons per day from a pond that held approximately 300,000 gallons, and that was continuously replenished by groundwater, was like taking a cup from a river. The river did not notice. Then the Spivies from the ridge, Orrin and Flick Spivey, an elderly couple with 6 goats and a stubbornness about asking for help that lasted exactly as long as their goats could go without water, which was 3 days. Then the Gannett family from the south, Burke and Lila Gannett, with a cattle operation that needed 200 gallons per day for the livestock alone. And Burke drove his wagon to the quarry every morning for 6 weeks and filled 4 barrels and drove them home and poured them into his stock trough and drove back and did it again. By August, Delia had organized the water access into a system. She built a second crane on the west rim for the Lanfords and Spivies. She laid a stone trough from the east crane to a livestock watering area below the rim where the Gannets brought their cattle. She dug a channel from the quarry overflow, the point where the water level met the wagon ramp, to her garden, creating a gravity-fed irrigation system that kept her crops watered while every other garden in the district withered. Trudy Lanford was the one who said it plainly. She stood on the quarry rim in August, watching her children carry water from the crane, watching the livestock drink from the stone trough, watching Delia pull tomatoes from a garden that was green when everything else was brown. And she said, "Clive Boyce gave you the only water in the county and thought he was giving you nothing." "He gave me a hole," Delia said. "The water was already in it." Thank you for watching this story on the warm floor. If it reminded you that sometimes the thing everyone calls worthless is the thing that saves everyone, please share it. Subscribe for more stories from the frontier and tell us in the comments, what would you have built? The drought broke in September. The wells recovered. The families went back to their own water. But the relationships that the quarry had built did not go back. They stayed, the way stone stays, because the 4 families who had drawn water and eaten tomatoes and watched their livestock drink from the quarry trough in August did not forget who had shared and who had not. And the woman on the quarry property was no longer Clive Boyce's discarded daughter-in-law, but the person who had the water when the water ran out. Delia lived on the quarry property for 12 years. She expanded the garden to 40 feet by 60, added a second room to the stone house using more reject blocks, built a small dairy with a spring house that used quarry water piped through a wooden channel to keep the milk cold. She sold tomatoes and cheese and butter at the market in Cookville and at the doors of the 4 families who had been her first customers and who remained her most loyal ones, not out of gratitude, but out of preference, because the products were good and the woman who made them was reliable, and the quarry that everyone had called worthless turned out to be the most valuable 12 acres in the district. Not for the stone that had been taken out of it, but for the water that had filled it back in. Clive Boyce came to the quarry once, in the 3rd year. He stood on the south rim and looked at the stone house and the garden and the dairy and the cranes and the livestock trough and the 4 families' wagon tracks worn into the clay of the approach road. And he stood there for a long time with his hands in his pockets. And whether he was calculating the value of what he had given away or simply looking at the daughter-in-law he had underestimated is not recorded, because Clive was not the kind of man who shared his calculations, and Delia was not the kind of woman who asked for them. He left without speaking to her. He did not come back, settle back, listen carefully, and journey with us through the legends, hard truths, and enduring wisdom of the American frontier. subscribe to the warm floor. The fire is warm, the night is still, and the frontier has much to teach.